Hello and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. Chris, how are you doing? And all the people out there, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Happy holidays to everyone out there for sure. And you too, of course.
Thank you. All right, so we have a lot of pitchers to discuss who have signed minor league contracts with non-roster invitations to MLB spring training. Some of these have happened this past week. Others before that, we just haven't gotten to them. I think it's important that we mention all of the pitchers who are going to be in camp. Matt Seelinger, Cole Waits, Emmanuel DeJesus, Sean Gunther, Jack Little, Tyler Mattison, and friend of the podcast, Dugan Darnell. You are an expert on the minor leagues. You've watched a lot of these guys come through the system, others from outside the organization, but do any of the names that I just mentioned stand out to you? Anybody that you're saying, hey, when we get to spring training in February, I'm going to have my eyes on this guy or maybe a different dude, and maybe he has a chance to make the opening day roster. And if not, he could contribute at some point in the 2026 season. Of those names, who are you watching for?
You just never know with relievers, right? Like any of these guys could pop or have a good 6-week stretch and they make the club. The two that jumped out to me immediately are guys that we've heard before. Gunther was on the team. Tyler Mattison, I think, has late inning upside if he can stay healthy and throw strikes. And with Gunther, he's had some success before. You can never have too many lefties in the bullpen. I think that the same theory goes with Emmanuel DeJesus, and he's been in Korea as a starter for a couple of years. Who knows what he's developed over there, and maybe he comes back with some funky stuff. We talked about Matt Seelinger a little bit before. He's got a really interesting sort of knuckle puck thing that he calls, and he's had good results in the upper minors. So maybe it's another fun trick pitch there. And Cole Waits used to throw really hard and has a lot of extension, which I think they like. It's been a long time since he's thrown a lot of innings. I think he's barely thrown at all in the last 3 years or so. I'm not really sure what to expect there, but that's the sort of flyer you take on, give him an invite to spring training, see what happens. This is Drew Anderson a couple of years ago. And then Jack Little and Dugan Darnell. Dugan Darnell was a very nice young man. We talked to him. I was excited for him, hoping that they can do something, but I honestly haven't seen a ton of them actually in game action. So we'll just have to see in spring training.
Yeah, I don't have as much expertise on these guys, especially the guys who are in the Tigers minor league system or who have been in the past as you do. But the three names that jump out to me are kind of the three names that you mentioned as well. Tyler Mattison, Sean Gunther, and Emmanuel DeJesus. For Tyler Mattison, I do think the upside is tremendous. And he just recently missed 14 months with Tommy John surgery. That happened in early April of 2024. And then he returned in late May of 2025. And he struggled a little bit in his return, but we saw him get his first taste of AAA Toledo. And it was 19 innings there across 20 games. It was a 3.79 ERA, 16 walks and 26 strikeouts. Fastball, slider, changeup. The fastball, it was sat around 94. Limits contact, gets whiffs, really high IVB, so that's good. It has a lot of ride to it. Those are all things that I like to see, especially from a reliever who throws his fastball as often as Tyler Mattison does. I'm going to be watching to see how the secondary pitches play, the slider and the changeup. But more importantly, can he locate more pitches for strikes? He needs to cut down the walks if he wants to be a high leverage reliever in the big leagues. But if he gets in the zone, I think the sky is the limit for his potential. And a lot of people don't know this, but the Tigers at one point in the 2025 season were counting on Tyler Mattison to pitch meaningful innings at the end of the regular season and possibly even into the postseason. And although that didn't happen, I do think he has a pretty clear pathway to becoming a big piece of the Tigers bullpen in 2026, as long as he throws more strikes. If not, he's going to be useless. I mean, do you think for him, it just comes down to pitch execution? And if that improves in year 2 back from Tommy John surgery, we could be seeing him in the Tigers bullpen as soon as mid-season, maybe even earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes these guys move very quickly. Dylan Smith was not really part of the plan heading into last year, but he had a really good offseason and looked really good early in the season in the minors. And there he was up in the majors. It didn't last long, but you could see something like that where if Madison looks like a big league pitcher in the minors for 10 innings and he's throwing strikes and they need an arm, he could be one that gets called up for sure. Yeah, I mean, he does have that upside. And he was one of the guys that I was hoping they would resign. And I do think it's good depth, if nothing else.
And then for Sean Gunther, too, do you think there's any way that he could make his way into the number 3 lefty reliever on the depth chart when you consider the Tigers have Tyler Holton and Brant Herter, and those guys seem like they're going to be locks for the opening day bullpen. Definitely Holton. I think Herter has to earn his way onto the opening day roster, but I do think that there's a good chance that he's going to make the opening day roster. However, you have other guys like Drew Summers and Bailey Horn, and those guys are on the 40-man roster right now. Sean Gunther, not on the 40-man roster. He had season-ending left hip surgery in late June. Obviously, everyone remembers him for his fantastic 2024, helping the Tigers in their magical run, leading them to the postseason, getting the big double play against Kyle Tucker in the postseason, but he couldn't replicate it in 2025. Then he had the hip surgery. He should be ready for the start of spring training. Do you think he could work his way into number 3 lefty reliever on the depth chart, where you're looking at him as behind Holton and Herter, but ahead of Drew Summers and Bailey Horn? Or do you think that's more of an uphill battle for Sean Gunther to get back to where he was in 2024?
It's probably an uphill battle because he's always been at least in the big leagues, he's been a pitch to contact guy, and you just never know with pitchers like that.
It's a fastball like 90 miles an hour, and he keeps the ball on the ground and limits walks. That's about it.
Yeah, and the thing he has going in his favor is that they've seen him do it before, and they may lean on that and know that he can do it. But it'd be one thing if he were 14 strikeout per 9 guy, or even like an Andrew Chafin, gets a lot of strikeouts and a lot of walks, but you believe in the ability to miss bats. Some of it is just, it's with him, it's going to be locating and spotting his stuff. And if he can do that, then he's got a chance. But it's tough to predict that coming off an injury.
Yeah, especially coming off an injury. But for Gunther, I would think that he would have to prove it in AAA Toledo over a significant period of time before the Tigers rely on him. But I do think there is a world in which he could move into that number 3 lefty reliever on the depth chart, especially if we see Bailey Horn struggle to throw strikes, which we've seen in the past. And Drew Summers, the Tigers had high hopes for him, and he hasn't turned out to be much of anything. So if that continues to fall off by the wayside, I really could see Sean Gunther stepping in and maybe being a key piece for the Tigers, but not until the second half of the season. He has to first show he's healthy, and 2, show he can be productive at the AAA level before he gets a chance. And then also left-hander Emmanuel DeJesus. He spent the past 2 seasons as a starter in the KBO League in South Korea. I would expect him to be a starter in AAA Toledo, but he could transition to being a reliever in the big leagues if the Tigers need him there. Only 2 games in his MLB career, both as a multi-inning reliever with the Marlins in 2023. Then he went to the KBO League. He was a starter for the Kiwoom Heroes in 2024 and the KT Wiz in 2025. Looking at the numbers over those 2 years, he combined for a 3.83 ERA with a 6.1% walk rate and a 23.8% strikeout rate over 334 innings in 62 starts. Last time he was in the big leagues, it was fastball, changeup, slider, sinker. I think he profiles best as starter depth at AAA Toledo, which is probably where he'll end up in 2026, assuming he doesn't make the opening day roster out of spring training. It's just a lefty starter depth piece for the Tigers, which I don't know if that's the worst thing for the Tigers right now. Like, there aren't a lot of lefties in the organization, and certainly not a lot of lefty starters not named Tarik Skubal. So do you view this as just depth starter in Toledo? And if you need him at some point for a spot start, you need him. If not, no big deal?
Yeah, probably. I don't know if that's one of those swingman type roles where we need some innings and it's his day to pitch and we need somebody. And I think I mentioned this before. His value is that you could cut him without worrying too much. They don't like to do that too often. If they could bring a guy up, they want to have pitch a little bit. Maybe the Brian Sammons role, right? Like, just, hey, we need some innings and who knows what he'll give you.
Let's get to the bigger news of the week. The Tigers designated for assignment Justyn-Henry Malloy to create space on the 40-man roster for Kyle Finnegan. The 40-man roster is now full after the additions of Finnegan, Kenley Jansen, Andrew Anderson. We made our predictions last week, and we talked a lot about the chances of J-Hen getting cut. But what are your thoughts now that it's officially happened?
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't even think it was an option until you mentioned it. And I was like, yeah, maybe. I just thought as a guy that they acquired in a trade that they probably still like. But yeah, the more you think about it, the more it makes some sense. Unfortunately, because Malloy is an awesome kid. I've had a chance to talk to him a few times. Really nice guy, really fun to talk to. And he's got some talent. He just couldn't break through and get consistent playing time because he doesn't really have a defensive position. And yeah, basically Jahmai Jones taking over that role as the lefty masher last year, hurts as a corner outfielder. And then adding Eduardo Valencia to the 40-man roster takes away Malloy's other potential position at first base DH, and Valencia can theoretically play catcher. So he just got pushed off the roster. And I think I mentioned it before too. He's got skills, but walking can't be your best skill. It's great to have, but you also have to be able to hit a little bit. And he does have power. He does have some hitting ability, but just not quite enough particularly if you're a first base DH type on a contender. It would not shock me if he's going to get picked up, I think, almost certainly. And it wouldn't shock me if the Tigers work out like a small trade with somebody, because I would think Colorado would just take him right away. They got rid of Michael Toglia. They could use a first baseman and give him 400, 500 plate appearances. And maybe he's just a late bloomer. But just no room for him here.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. The news itself, I'm happy the Tigers feel like their 40-man roster is competitive enough that Justyn-Henry Malloy, soon to be 26-year-old right-handed hitter, is getting chopped. Like, that's not a bad way to sell this situation. But at the same time, it's disappointing for a lot of people. Like, First off, I'm disappointed for Jay-Hen. He only got 357 plate appearances in the big leagues with the Tigers. He hit just 209 with a 657 OPS in 123 games. But did he deserve more opportunities? I think the two of us could probably go back and forth on that all day long if he deserved more opportunities, even if it meant bad defense in the outfield. Second, I'm disappointed for Scott Harris because Scott Harris acquired Jay-Hen from the Braves in the Joe Jimenez trade and expected this kid to help reshape the Tigers' offensive identity. But in reality, Jay-Hen had serious swing and miss issues on pitches inside the strike zone. And on top of that, I remember Scott Harris liked that Jay-Hen could play outfield and third base when he acquired him. But it turns out Jay-Hen was a designated hitter only type of player. So I don't think Scott Harris got what he expected on offense or defense. And that obviously sucks. Like, I know he loves his prospects, but not all of his prospects are going to hit. The real challenge is being right more than you're wrong. And on this one, he was wrong about Jay-Hen. And then third, I'm disappointed for Tigers fans. I think they were expecting Jay-Hen to be, and this is nothing against Jay-Hen, it's just how it unfolded. Tigers fans, I think they expected Jay-Hen to be a cornerstone piece for the Tigers. If you remember when Scott Harris acquired Justyn-Henry Malloy, he pitched Jay-Hen to the fans as a player who could help transform the Tigers' offensive identity. It was the first major trade acquisition in the Scott Harris era, about 1 month before Matt Vierling, Nick Maton, and Donnie Sand showed up from the Phillies. So yes, Jay-Hen can draw a walk by controlling the strike zone, but no, he never showed the power that was promised. And he never showed the bat-to-ball skills that were promised. And ultimately, I think that just sucks for Tigers fans who were expecting an everyday player who could help the Tigers eventually win a World Series, because that's essentially what the front office told the fans Jay-Hen would be in a Tigers uniform. But I do hope Jay-Hen gets another opportunity in the big leagues in 2026. I don't think it will be with the Tigers because, to your point, I think he will get claimed off waivers by a different team. And I hope one of the other 29 teams picks him up and gives him a chance to be an everyday player. And I have no doubt that Jay-Hen will be a tremendous presence in the clubhouse. Like, he's a great teammate no matter where he ends up. Like, even if he were to end up back in AAA Toledo off the 40-man roster, let's just say that by some chance, the 1% chance that he clears waivers and ends up back in Toledo, he will be a great teammate in that Mud Hens clubhouse. And that's something that you can't teach that. Like, that is just who he is. That's the personality. So he is a true professional, one of the best teammates I've ever seen. Whatever team ends up with him, they're going to be lucky not only to have the player, but the person in their organization. However, I still feel like it's just disappointing all the way around that Jay-Hen, it just didn't work out here with the Tigers. All right, let's get into the big two. Question one of the big two. Tarik Skubal will pitch in the World Baseball Classic for Team USA, and he spent this past weekend in Detroit. What was your reaction to hearing the WBC news, and what did you think about his tour through Detroit?
I love the World Baseball Classic. I think it's awesome. You get this mix of superstars like Skubal and then guys you haven't heard of in 10 years who are playing for the Netherlands or Great Britain or something like that. And then guys you haven't ever heard of. And sometimes you get a good look at the next wave of Japanese and Korean players are going to come to the States one day. And so it's a really fun event. And I love watching the crowds in other parts of the world that go absolutely bonkers. They're singing songs and chanting. It's like watching a Premier League soccer game, but it's baseball. And it's, oh man, it'd be pretty cool if they did this in the States. But for Skubal, it's awesome, right? Because he's the best player or best pitcher in the country. He and Skeens, and they're both on the team. So that's going to make the States pretty formidable, which was fun. And, but I do think, I don't want to be 100% cynical, right? And I do think that Skubal it's probably a thrill for him to pitch for the United States. And I'm sure he had a lot of fun going to every sporting event in the state of Michigan over the weekend. But I'm also not naive, right? I think this is part of turning him into a superstar, somebody who you can market, who's going to be a brand ambassador or city ambassador for your team. He's not going to embarrass you. He's going to be out there in the public eye doing cool things, and people are going to like him. It makes him more valuable on the open market even. Like I said, like, I'm sure he didn't do this reluctantly, but I think there is more to it than him just going out and having a bunch of fun.
Yeah, here's my takeaway on all this. To start with the visit to Detroit, Tarik Skubal, he visits Detroit and he left without a contract extension. That's really all you need to know. It wasn't a business trip to negotiate a new contract with the Tigers. It was a boys' trip to show his close friends the VIP treatment. And that's really all you need to know from the baseball side of Tarik Skubal coming to Detroit for the weekend. He's still set to be a free agent after the 2026 season. And just to make sure everyone understands too, Tarik Skubal did this exact same thing with the exact same group of friends last offseason as well. So this is a second annual trip to Detroit. This is not just like a one-off, suddenly he showed up. Like he did this last offseason as well. And he went to a Michigan State game. He did the Pistons. He did the Red Wings. He went to a Lions game. Like he did it all last offseason, just like he did this offseason. But all you really need to know is he came to Detroit and he left without a contract extension. From the baseball side, that's all that really matters. From the actual trip, like it seemed like you had a good time. You got a chance to experience Michigan State versus Oakland in college basketball, Detroit Pistons game, Detroit Red Wings game, Detroit Lions game. He even threw passes with the football on the turf at Ford Field after the Lions game ended. So that was probably the highlight of the trip for him, was dropping back and throwing passes into the end zone at Ford Field. That's always cool. He did t-shirt tosses at Little Caesars Arena during both the college basketball and the pro basketball games. He also got to spend time with Tom Izzo, Cade Cunningham, Dan Campbell. He even went to Comerica Park and worked out in the Tigers weight room. So yeah, I mean, if I'm Tarik Skubal, like that sounds like something that I would want to do just in my free time. Like not only to show fans how much I appreciate them and to make a name for myself even further on a statewide level, but also to show my close friends what it's like to be the king of the city. I think that's the primary reason for doing it, right? Is to show some love to the fans. Also, give your good buddies a fun weekend in Detroit. And all that happened over the weekend. And by Monday afternoon, Skubal was back home golfing in Arizona, which is where he and his family call home. As for the World Baseball Classic news, that came as a surprise to me. And I think you make a really good point. I want to get to it, but I think it might have been a surprise to the Tigers as well. I heard the Tigers weren't expecting Skubal to participate. And I don't think anyone in the baseball industry expected it either, because this is a very important year for Tarik Skubal. Playing highly competitive games in March in the WBC, it might not be in Skubal's best interest, considering it deviates from his typical spring training routine, and he will be a free agent just 8 months after the WBC, so he wouldn't want to take any extra injury risks. But sure enough, Tarik Skubal doesn't care. He's going to do it. He's going to participate for Team USA in the WBC with Paul Skeens, Logan Webb, Joe Ryan in the starting rotation. The position players, Aaron Judge, Bobby Witt Jr., Gunnar Henderson, Kyle Schwarber, Cal Raleigh, Corbin Carroll. The relievers, it includes Mason Miller and David Bednar. I mean, this is truly an elite group of players. I'm not surprised that Tarik Skubal wanted to be a part of it, but I'm surprised that he ended up doing it, especially in his walk year with free agency coming up. But this leans right into your point. If you are looking for ways to increase your value, there's something to be said for leading Team USA to a WBC championship. Like right now, agent Scott Boras, he cannot call Tarik Skubal a trophy pitcher in free agent negotiations because Tarik Skubal hasn't won any team trophies. He's not someone that you can say, hey, look what Tarik Skubal did for the Detroit Tigers. He pitched for them and he won a World Series with them. Look what he did deep into October, because Tarik Skubal has not pitched deep into October. He has not won the World Series. But if Skubal wins the WBC with Team USA, then Scott Boras can call him a trophy pitcher, which I promise you will be used in negotiations during free agency. So maybe pitching in the WBC is actually a smart business decision from that standpoint. I think either way, it's going to be fun to watch Skubal, but if you want to increase your value, winning in the WBC is probably the way to do it, especially if you don't have a chance to win a World Series with the Tigers.
And it is interesting. You mentioned, I don't know how much control teams have over that and say, no, you can't pitch in this. But I do know the Tigers. So one of the great WBC stories from the last tournament was Duque Hebert of Nicaragua, who was this guy nobody had ever heard of. And he comes into a game and he strikes out Rafael Devers. He gives it a double to Manny Machado, but then he strikes out Julio Rodriguez and Juan Soto. He strikes out those guys and the Tigers go and sign him. And it was like, oh, this is awesome. And I've watched him in the minors the last few years, and he still has a great changeup, which is what he was using against those guys, but he barely touches 90 miles an hour. And the Tigers would not let him pitch in the WBC qualifiers for Nicaragua a couple of years ago, or this last summer. So it is, and he's not like what I would consider a priority prospect for them. I don't think, but they wouldn't let him. They probably don't want Skubal doing this, but I don't know. They're caught here. If they say no, then it's going to cause a big stink. No, it's interesting.
No, they're going to let him do it. So we're going to see Tarik Skubal pitching for Team USA in the WBC. And I love that you mentioned Duque Hebert, because the first game for Team USA is March 6th against Brazil. The championship game is set for March 17th, but March 6th against Brazil, you never know who's going to strike out Aaron Judge and who the Tigers may sign next. So keep an eye out for that. All right, let's get to question 2 of the big 2. Christmas is here. If you were the Tigers, what would you put on your wish list to Santa Claus?
So this was it's a fun question. And we had three different gifts here, if you will. And I broke it down to a stocking stuffer, a big gift, and the Christmas miracle. Tried to have a little bit of fun with it, not just be like 3 realistic guys. So for my stocking stuffer, put down 2 names. One I mentioned before, and Seranthony Dominguez is another reliever that they can go out and get. That he does, he strikeouts and velocity. It's the one thing that they still don't really have in the bullpen. Will Vest throws plenty hard, but Dominguez is sitting 97, 98 and strikes out 12, 13 per 9. There's some walks in there too, but I think it would just add another dimension and make the bullpen just that much deeper. The other one is Zach Eflin, who I just don't think we've heard a lot of people talk about as a potential starting pitcher. And I get it. He had a really bad 2025 season. It was a 5.93 ERA and was it 70 something innings? He was hurt. And it's hard to picture a more obvious injury. If you go to Baseball Savant, you could look at the arm angles, and from 2020 to 2023, his arm angle was 31 degrees. And then 2023, it was 33, and then it was down to 27, and last year it was down to 24. And I don't think that happens if you're healthy. I don't think you just drop your arm angle 6-7 degrees. So you have to check in on him, make sure he is healthy. But if he is, it's fun. He's from the same high school as Riley Green. That matters a lot. But I do think the Tigers were interested in him a couple of years ago. And from 2023 to 2024, those 2 seasons, he was arguably a top 20 pitcher in baseball. 3.54 ERA over 343 innings, close to 60 starts. Was good for almost 8 WAR. He's never been a huge strikeout guy, but close, not bad. He's close to 1 an inning, and he doesn't walk anybody. He had the second lowest walk rate over those 2 seasons, and he's still only 32. So it's not that frontline starter, although you might get sneaky frontline starter results from him in the old Doug Fister mold back in the day, where it's this guy doesn't break the bank. You're probably going to get, I don't know, he might cost you around the same as Zach Gallen, maybe a little bit less, but I think you might get pretty good results out of him. And so he would be a fun stocking stuffer to me.
So I love those 2 ideas right there, specifically Seranthony Dominguez, because when I look at the Tigers bullpen, I still have questions about the swing and miss. I still don't see how this bullpen gets enough swing and miss to really take a big step forward from where they were last season. If you look at who they have in their bullpen, it is Will Vest, it is Kyle Finnegan, and it is Kenley Jansen. Those are their 3 high leverage relievers. And yes, Will Vest continues to trend in the right direction, but Kyle Finnegan and Kenley Jansen, they are not known for missing bats. They are not known as these elite bat missers. Whereas Seranthony Dominguez, you look at what he did, and it was a 33.3% swing and miss rate in 2025. And yes, a 30% strikeout rate. Now, that did come with a 13.8% walk rate. So he is walking the house, but also getting a ton of strikeouts. There is some give and take there when it comes to a guy that's striking out the world and also struggling with the walks. But from a pure swing and miss strikeout standpoint, I think Seranthony Dominguez is perfect. If the Tigers can wait out his market, and if they're able to get him on a cheaper 1-year deal that they're comfortable with, by all means, go for it. I don't like the idea of locking up Seranthony Dominguez for 2 years or anything like that. I wouldn't want to get trapped into his profile, especially because of the walks. But if you could get him for a year, I love the idea of Seranthony Dominguez, just because it would really give the Tigers their first true swing and miss pitcher in the bullpen. It's something I think they still really need. As for Zach Eflin, Zach Eflin, Chris Bassett, whoever it is, give me another starter. I'll take it all day long. As for my stocking stuffer, Jack Flaherty bounces back to number 2 starter performance. I don't think the Tigers actually need Jack Flaherty to become a number 2 starter, just because you have the greatness that is Tarik Skubal. You got some solid mid-rotation starters like Reese Olson and Casey Mize. Plus, Troy Melton has mid-rotation upside. Jackson Jobe is expected to return at some point in the second half of the season. But even beyond all that, Jack Flaherty is going to become a free agent after the 2026 season, as long as he doesn't receive and accept the qualifying offer. So that's why it's just a stocking stuffer to me. But I do think it would be a pretty big boost if Flaherty gives you frontline starter quality in his performance, because you're going to get the quality. He's going to give you at least 150 innings over 30 starts. The question is, do we get 3 ERA Jack Flaherty, or do we get 4.5 ERA Jack Flaherty? I think the reality is probably somewhere in between, where he's going to have a 4 ERA in 2026, but if he can creep closer to the 3 ERA, 5% walk rate, 30% strikeout rate version that we saw for 18 starts in 2024 before the trade to the Dodgers. And I think the Tigers immediately have the best 1-2 punch among all starters in baseball. It's got to be pretty close. They'd have probably one of the top 5 1-2 punches in Tarik Skubal and Jack Flaherty if Flaherty is able to do what he did in 2024 and repeat it here in 2026. So I don't think it's going to happen that way, but that's why it's on the wish list, because the Tigers should be wishing for it to happen.
Yeah. And then beyond that, that's a stocking stuffer. That's just a little something. The big gift here, and I went with it's two sides of the same coin. And then this is partially because Scott Harris has talked about building from within. Their acquisitions over the offseason are just getting better. And it's one of them would be Kevin McGonigle and Max Clark having such an awesome spring that they've forced their way onto the big league roster. We have no choice but to bring these guys up. They are ready. They're going to be 2 of our 5 best players. The flip side of that is we see Colt Keith and Parker Meadows have big breakouts this year. If you look at the spots on the roster where you could possibly upgrade, it's the left side of the infield and maybe center field if Parker Meadows doesn't figure it out. The talent is there for both of those guys. If they put it all together, Colt Keith, he needs to hit for more power. But if he gets to play third base regularly and he is solid defensively and does hit for more power, there's a potential 3-4 win player in there. And same with Parker Meadows. If Parker Meadows, he doesn't really even need to go crazy. If he has 100 WRC plus and plays above average center field defense, he's going to be really valuable. So those are 2 guys that I think that would be a big gift to the 2026 season. If those 2 guys could take a big step forward, or failing that, like I said, McGonigle and Clark just forced their way onto the roster.
Yeah, I'm going to lean into that, especially with Parker Meadows. My big gift is Parker Meadows becomes the everyday center fielder, not only in 2026, but of the future. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I really do think, aside from Tarik Skubal, nobody is more important to the Tigers, both the present and the future, than Parker Meadows. Like, when he is at his best, I truly believe he is a 4.5 to 5 WAR player with above average offense, elite defense in center field, and above average speed on the bases. When he is at his very best, like peak of his performance, the tippy top of his potential, that is what Parker Meadows can be. And we've seen him do it before. Just look at what he did in 2024 during the final 2 months of the regular season and the postseason. And then everything came crashing down in 2025. He was limited to 58 games. Because of several injuries, including a weird nerve injury in his arm that forced him to miss pretty much all of spring training and in the first 60 games of the regular season. But I think the upside here is like a 260 batting average with 20 home runs and an 850 OPS with Gold Glove defense in center field and 20 steals on the bases. That's what Parker Meadows can be. And if he reaches that level of performance, I think it changes everything about the way we should view the Tigers moving forward. I mean, it makes Max Clark a corner outfielder, not a center fielder. And maybe it even makes Max Clark expendable in a trade. Parker Meadows doesn't become a free agent until after the 2030 season. So he has 5 more seasons with the Tigers, and he hasn't even reached 700 plate appearances in his MLB career. So I think there's still a lot that we don't know about Parker Meadows, but the year 2026 is going to tell us everything we need to know. And it would be a big gift for the Tigers if Meadows becomes the everyday center fielder of the future, reaching his elite upside.
And then the final result here is the Christmas miracle. You may know where this is going. I could just mention both of these. I think either one of them would be a bit of a miracle. It's signing Tarik Skubal to a long-term deal or signing Alex Bregman. I think you'd pull off either of those, and the fans are super excited, and I'm sure there'd be a small segment that would still want you to do more. They want you to do both. But I think that would really kickstart the excitement for the 2026 season and make people feel like you're really trying and really going for it. And that would, unfortunately, it's called a Christmas miracle because I don't see either happening. But that's my miracle.
My Christmas miracle, Alex Bregman signs a long-term contract. And this is why you listen to Days of Roar week in and week out. This is why you hang on until the 30-minute mark here in today's episode, because you're going to get an Alex Bregman update. Nothing new from the Tigers. It really does seem like they're in wait-and-see mode. So if the market crashes, maybe they'll jump into the mix once we get into mid-January. But as of now, the Tigers are not one of the teams in on Alex Bregman. It's the Blue Jays, Red Sox, Diamondbacks, and Cubs who are in the hunt for Bregman, with the Tigers nowhere to be found. So yes, it would be a Christmas miracle if Alex Bregman signs not even a long-term contract, just a contract with the Tigers. And I talked about this last offseason. I'll mention it again. This is my own personal opinion on this. You can't follow the market and expect to land a player like Alex Bregman. So being in wait-and-see mode, it is a passive strategy that I don't think will result in landing the player. Like, you have to be aggressive to land a player like Alex Bregman, but the Tigers, as of now, they've refused to be aggressive in their pursuit this offseason. So I do think we are going to need Santa to deliver a Christmas miracle, because the other teams, Blue Jays, Red Sox, Diamondbacks, Cubs, have serious interest, while the Tigers simply aren't doing anything. I do have one more thing on my wish list, and this is not what I'm wishing for, either personally or professionally, but it's what I wonder if should the Tigers be wishing for this scenario, because it's the only way for the Tigers to keep their superstar pitcher beyond 2026. And you know right where I'm going with this. Tarik Skubal suffers an injury, lowering his value and making him easy to re-sign. Like, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this being on the Tigers' wish list because it's morbid, but we need to talk about it. Do you think that an injury would be the easiest path to the Tigers re-signing Skubal, the most likely path to the Tigers re-signing Skubal at this point in the situation? We know where we're at. The clock is ticking, and Tarik Skubal is going to become a free agent unless something happens.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do think that's probably the case. It's probably going to have to be something negative where the Tigers no longer have to give him a long-term deal or something that's $40 million a year. Yeah, it's tough to think about that. Maybe he injures his finger on the last pitch of the World Series or something like that. But yeah, like you said, it's unfortunately, it may be the only way for Skubal to stick around, at least realistic way, unless they just change their tune and decide to give him all the money.
I don't see Chris Ilitch ponying up for $450 million or $500 million or $550 million in the bidding war against all the other high-spending teams. But anyway, all right, we're going to take a break. When we return, we're joined by FanGraphs writer Dan Szymborski. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Dan Szymborski, senior writer for FanGraphs and developer of the Zips projection system, to the Days of Roar podcast for the second time. We had him on just before Christmas last year, and we're doing it again this year. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. How are you doing today?
Doing well. All right, let's dive right into the Zips projection. You're the founder of it, so what can you tell us about the Zips projection system? What is it? How did it come to be? And what does it help us understand as we look ahead to the 2026 season?
Well, Zips is a fairly complicated set of interlocking computer algorithms that basically get an estimate of where a player has been, and using different mathematical techniques estimates where the player is going. Obviously, this is a very error-prone thing because predicting the future is very difficult. I don't claim to have a crystal ball or a time machine. That would make my projections more accurate, but I don't. We are just trying to peer through the fog just a little bit and try to gauge each player's future. And I like projections at this time of the winter because I think you get a lot of questions and a lot of interesting things come from projections that you don't necessarily get if you wait until March to do anything. If you've seen hurricane forecasts, Zips works in a similar fashion. You see a little players like the little hurricane symbol and that big cone going out instead of whether they go into the Caribbean or hit the United States. It's, do you get signed by the Yankees or do you have to be a White Sox in the future? That's the hurricane forecast for a player.
So one of the things, and we can move it on into the Tigers talk a little bit here, is over the offseason, the Tigers closed out the season saying they're not just going to run it back. And then language has changed a little bit where they've said most of our improvement's going to come from within. And I thought you might be uniquely qualified to answer this sort of question because I've seen when free agents sign, you see these examinations that sort of bake in half a WAR loss per year as players get older. But I'm curious if there's a similar sort of thing that, a standard way that players improve as they get older towards their sort of peak ages, and if the Tigers can expect that sort of thing in the future.
Generally speaking, as a group, you can expect young players to improve, but it's a very erratic thing. People tend to overrate the probability of a prospect improving. It's just that we don't necessarily see the ones that don't improve because the ones that don't improve from A-ball or double-A play pretty terribly at AA or AAA and never make the majors. Generally speaking, when you're talking about a 25 or 26-year-old, most of it is already baked into the cake, so to speak. And then it becomes a question of whether continued development of skills can continue to outweigh what is physical decline. Players do tend to decline physically early. It's obviously a less grueling sport than football is on a game-to-game basis, but a baseball season is a long time. Injuries pile up and players don't become more durable as they age, generally speaking. So generally speaking, you want players that are young with upside, and it's the upside that's interesting. Players who don't necessarily have everything together yet have the most to gain, the most upside remaining. When you talk to someone who's a complete done deal, there's not so much new that they're going to do to improve. I think people have this idea that a guy who's looks like a Hall of Famer at 21 isn't going to just smoothly continue to improve at 27. They're mostly players who have peaked fairly early. I call that the Justin Upton rule, where everyone's like, this is how good he is at 20. He's going to be amazing at 25. And as I told people at the time, he might actually just be the player he is at 20 or even worse. Same with, I guess, Jason Hayward. So I think the idea is you have your core talent and you have players who are interesting, who you can either figure can contribute to a division title or a World Series run now or can in the future. And everything else is relatively just water treading.
So you explain the concept of the ZiPS projection system. What does it tell you about the 2026 Tigers? Do you think these guys are the clear-cut favorites to win the AL Central?
ZiPS generally likes the Tigers. Of course, having Skubal at the top of the rotation always helps anybody out. But if you look at the ZiPS projections, ZiPS is pretty confident about the depth of the Tiger offense, not necessarily the height. ZiPS has Riley Green as the top projected WAR for a position player at 3.1 WAR, which is rather on the slim side for a player, for a good team's top player. But ZiPS also sees the team as very deep. You look and there are a lot of guys, not just above 2 wins or 2 WAR, but between 1 and 2 WAR who are players who can contribute in a role. The Tigers don't really have a great deal of difficulty assembling this roster into kind of a competitive lineup. And I think that's probably one of the reasons you haven't seen them be super active in free agency, because when you have a bunch of guys who are decent, it's very hard to upgrade on them. If you have a 4-win guy and a 0-win guy, it's pretty easy to get a 1-win guy and upgrade them. But the Tigers at most positions need to get like a 3 or 4-win guy to meaningfully improve the offense's efficiency. So it's easy to explain why the team has been conservative. I'm not sure why they wanted to get the idea they weren't going to be, because you don't want to, once you promise the stars, people can be disappointed when you give them the moon.
One reason, too, the Tigers maybe haven't been as active in free agency and trade is because they got Gleyber Torres back. They got Jack Flaherty back. We saw Gleyber Torres come back on that qualifying offer for $22 million. Jack Flaherty, he's back on the player option for $20 million. If you're the Tigers, how do you feel about those two players coming back at those $2 prices?
I think they're both reasonable. They're both players who are in that solid B to B plus category, who really, neither of them are old enough where you really expect them to decline severely. Jack Flaherty does have some risk involved, but every pitcher has risk involved. If he had no risk involved, he'd cost $200 million, because that's what things cost in baseball. Torres is fine. He's not the star he looked like. And he's another example of a player who people too much counted on him continuing to improve as a young player. He is one of those guys who seems to have peaked at about age 21, but he's fine. He's a good above average player. He's going to push the Tigers towards an AL Central title. And that's fine. Not everybody has to be a star. Right now, ZiPS does have the Tigers favored to win the AL Central. Obviously, this is still very early. There's a lot of assumptions, a lot of things to happen. But it does think that Kansas City is the biggest risk for the Tigers, though it will have the Tigers probably moderately favored as we enter the season, unless something really crazy happens. And things could happen. I don't know. That's why they're crazy.
Yeah, so thus far, aside from the Torres and Flaherty coming back, the only real moves we've seen is the Tigers have made some additions to their bullpen. And one of those was Kyle Finnegan coming back. So I don't know how much Kenley, Jansen, and Drew Anderson have moved the needle, but I don't know. Maybe you know.
It's been slim. ZiPS isn't super into Jansen. It sees some signs he's at that age where decline becomes a thing, I would just say. It does generally think that the Tigers could use another high-end bullpen arm, but those guys are really expensive and there's only a few of them available. And they tend to be pretty old this free agency, unless I'm concluding wrong.
So we did see the Tigers add, like you mentioned, Drew Anderson, Kenley Jansen, Kyle Finnegan. You mentioned maybe another high leverage reliever, but what areas do you think maybe need the most improvement, either in free agency or trade? Is it third base? Is it right field? Is it the bullpen? Is it another arm in the rotation, maybe to pitch behind Skubal, or something else, or maybe a combination of those ideas? What are some of your thoughts on where the Tigers could upgrade based on the ZiPS projection?
I think one of the opportunities to upgrade are mostly within rather than without. The free agent market isn't particularly deep in options. Now you could say, hey, bring in Framber Valdez or something to have a crazy good number 2, a little fallback from just in case. We'll get into that, but the Tigers have Skubal at the top, and as everyone listening to this knows, he's not signed for very long. So that would improve the Tigers significantly. I don't think they're actually going to do that. They haven't given any signs that, I know, that they intend to spend $160 to $220 million on a pitcher who isn't Skubal this offseason. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Not everyone tells me what they're doing, unfortunately. That would make things a lot easier. But when you look at the lineup, a lot of the opportunity as Zip sees is promoting some of these players more aggressively. For instance, Zips really likes Kevin McGonigle and thinks he should be given every opportunity to win the shortstop position outright, not just be someone who's coming along. Zips does think that Max Clark will at some point be able to push into the lineup. There are lots of names out there that are super duper interesting in the system. It's probably a really underrated system still, I think.
As a reminder, we're talking to Dan Szymborski, senior writer for FanGraphs. Dan, when you put these Zips projections out, you post a graph on X, and the graph has numbers on them and players on them. For example, you list Tarik Skubal, Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, Reese Olson, Troy Melton for the rotation. And then you do the same with the bullpen, where it features guys like Will Vest and Tyler Holton. And then for the diamond, we see Dylan Dingler at catcher, Riley Green in left field, Gleyber Torres at second base. And then there's Colt Keith at third base with other names like Kevin McGonigle and Zach McKinstry in smaller letters below Colt Keith's name. But you also have Keith in small letters below Spencer Torkelson at first base. Can you kind of walk us through how that design gets put together, what the numbers mean, and the importance of 40 WAR? Can you explain that to our listeners?
When you talk 40 WAR, you're talking about a team that's crossing that threshold from playoff possibility to playoff likeliness. The replacement level was set some years ago by an accord between FanGraphs and Baseball Reference to have 1,000 WAR available in a season, putting replacement level at 47.6 WAR. So when you talk a 40 WAR team, you're talking about an 87, 88 win team. That number is going to make you a strong wild card contender. It's going to steal you an AL Central division from time to time. And a team that's projected to win 87, 88 games has a pretty good chance of winning 92, 93 games, because there's a great deal of error when you talk about predicting the future. The depth charts at this time of the year, I use something different when I'm actually projecting teams. But at this point of the year, I align it with our depth charts simply because it's an easier way for people to be able to reference what the playing time is. The numbers are WAR, so 2 is roughly league average. You want to be too careful about adding up players. I tend to think that we're a little too optimistic on injuries for pitchers and really full timers on our depth charts. That's a whole other dispute. But generally speaking, it gives you a good roundup of who is actually going to play if the season started today, which it isn't. So there are going to be a lot of changes before the season actually gets closer.
One of the things people were having fun with that graphic, with the Zips graphic, is the shortstop, McGonigle, who is apparently just a mashup of several other players.
What happens is I run out of room in the chart. So I either have to make a joke or I have to make an amalgamation. And depending on who else is in the depth chart, I lose room. And it just gets fun because people get angry that who is this player? There's no player in the organization by this name. And half of being a journalist is trolling. I think that's the truth of the matter, because I think it was Ambrose Bierce who said there's no point in writing unless someone gets mad. And that is trolling behavior. And the fact that people can't figure that out sometimes, especially when it's pretty obvious, like I have a little accent over an A or there's a Mick there. Who could this be? If we look at the depth charts, I see names. Who could that possibly be? And I sometimes get thrilled out of that pain.
That's solid. Yeah, no, I was gonna move on to the Ambrose Bierce of baseball, Alex Bregman. We're going to have the same initials here.
Oh, is he going to disappear to Mexico and something bad happens possibly?
I hope not. But I know Tigers fans were really hoping that he would sign with Detroit last year, and he's available again this year. And I'm curious how easily you can plug it in and see what kind of difference he would make for the Tigers.
He does, but I think the problem becomes that, like I said before, the Tigers are not really that bad anywhere. And Bregman, you are getting someone who is going to be essentially a declining asset. That happens when you buy a any player as they're their age 32 season, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I think that the team that needs Bregman the most is the team that has a lousy third base situation, especially. And I think that changes the motivations to pay a player. Like, I don't think they're going to do it, but a team like the Reds has much more of an incentive to give Bregman what he wants than the Tigers do. I think the Tigers, they're not amazing at third, but they're probably a 2.5 win team at third. And the question is, how valuable is making a 2-win position a 3-win position? And it can be valuable, but I think the Tigers probably aren't going to chase every last win in that way, because nobody in the AL Central does. And that has to be part of the equation, that you're not going against a very aggressive set of opponents. No one is in fear that the Guardians are going to spend $300 million on a free agent.
We need to talk about the superstar of the Tigers. What does Zips project for back-to-back AL Cy Young winner Tarik Skubal in 2026? And maybe another way to look at this, and a more important way to look at this, would be, what would the Tigers be without Tarik Skubal in 2026?
Losing Skubal, as I'm sure everyone has figured out, would be really bad. And that would go with any team. There is no team that, having Tarik Skubal, could afford to then lose Tarik Skubal. He has the highest WAR projected of any player in base, or any pitcher in baseball. 5.5 WAR. Zips projects him to be half a win over, I believe the second place is Garrett Crochet. He's also has one of the best long-term projections of anyone in the league right now. I think. Now, he doesn't have the same career win projections as Logan Webb does, because Logan Webb's the current winner of the future win projections at under 200 wins as an over-under, mind you. Reminder to BBWWA voters who might be listening and are going to continue to impose extreme standards on pitchers, and we won't have anyone in this generation be in if you don't change how you look. Sorry, that's an aside, but Skubal is really good. Spoiler alert.
What do you think about Javi Baez in 2026? I mean, he bounced back a little bit in 2025, but there were inconsistencies along the way. You had talked about there being numerous options at shortstop. Where does Javi Baez fit in for the Tigers in 2026?
Did have a better season in 2025 than his first two in Detroit, but he was really up and down. I think that if people only went by like some of the early season highlights, they would think that Baez had a much better season than he actually did. He is a declining player who has serious holes in his game. And yeah, he still feels the position, not as well as he did when you talk about the end of the 2010s with the Cubs. And he is someone that ideally you would want to see Kevin McGonigle or anyone else start pushing out a bit. He's fun at times when things are going well, but his plate discipline isn't any better. His contact rate has improved a little, but it's still in a pretty bleak area. He is what he is at this point. And while he's not a gaping hole in the lineup, he is a place that you can upgrade. And I don't know how quickly the Tigers are going to do that, because he seems to lose position. He loses playing time slowly, but then when he plays well, he gets it back really quickly. So I'm not sure really where they are on him at the moment.
What does Zips project for Kevin McGonigle in 2026? Because he is the number 2 prospect in baseball. We might not see him on the opening day roster. It sounds like the Tigers want to give him some time at AAA Toledo first. What does that mean? We're going to find out. But what does Zips think about McGonigle in 2026? Can he be a real difference maker?
I think so. I think that upside is there. Zips does have him at a 112 OPS plus. That's an OPS right around 770, I believe, 13 home runs, really 2 to 2.5 WAR, and that's even without a full season projection. I think that if things go well, you want to get him into the lineup as much as possible, because good lefty bats who can field the position at shortstop are pretty rare, relatively speaking.
The Zips projection story comes out on FanGraphs. There are these 3 hitter comparisons for all of the position players. And back in 2025, McGonigle had number 1, Alex Bregman, number 2, David Fletcher, and number 3, Russ Adams. In 2026, Kevin McGonigle has number 1, Mookie Betts, number 2, Gary Sheffield, and number 3, Rance Mullikins. So is Kevin McGonigle the next Mookie Betts, Gary Sheffield, Alex Bregman, or is he one of those other guys?
I wouldn't go that far as when you're talking about an average outcome. I think that's a possibility. Zips, like for his career, does project McGonigle will be the 200 to 300 home run range, which is a really good projection for a prospect. Zips doesn't usually get super aggressive. You don't see Zips projecting half a dozen guys with 500 home runs coming out of the minors. I think those are high-end possibilities, because we're talking a Hall of Famer. No one comes out of the minors with a Hall of Famer as their baseline expectation. but there are a lot of signs that he's going to be a really good player for hopefully a long time.
And then what about Max Clark too? Kind of his partner in crime in the farm system, the other top prospect in the farm system. Should we expect an immediate impact from him in 2026, or should we be thinking about 2027, 2028 for when we really see the true impact of Max Clark on the Tigers in the big leagues?
Zip sees him slightly behind, not far behind McGonigle, but it does see that there are still some places he can improve. He hasn't really hit for a ton of power in the minors yet that can develop. I think there's still a question of just how good he is going to be defensively. He does have speed, but there have been some mixed opinions, and he also doesn't really have a lot of time in Double-A. He's only was there like 6 weeks, 2 months. I'm trying to remember. There's a funny thing. I always Zips has him initially in as Maxwell Clark, and I never remember who Maxwell Clark is until I'm like, oh, that's Max Clark. I was like, who the hell is Maxwell Clark? When I run the projections, that happens with Tink Hence and the Cardinals too. I was like, who is Markevian Hence? Oh, Tink Hence. Okay, I get it. I digress. I think that he's coming, and if he's really great in the minors, you don't keep him down there needlessly. He might be able to help the team. But I do think that you don't necessarily expect him to push out the competition in spring like I hope McGonigle does.
Yeah, you mentioned McGonigle's projected for 200 plus home runs. Do you ever publish like a full career like projections? It reminds me of back in the day when John Sickles used to do kind of his crystal ball. I used to love those things where you look and you predict Verlander's career 20 years later.
I do sometimes. I don't usually do it en masse because people don't always understand that the error bars on a career projection are really high. And I don't think projections are super useful when the reader has difficult interpreting what they mean. I think there's an old saying, I forget who said it now, that all models are wrong, some are useful. And Zips is useful, but Zips also requires interpretation. So I don't necessarily release everything I have to the general public. When a team sees the data, they understand what it means and what it doesn't. And I don't want to be the nanny lecturer saying, okay, it says 350 home runs, but there's also like a 20% chance they're under 50. That would be kind of obnoxious, I think. I do bring it up from time to time, just not necessarily en masse. And when I do the Zips top 100 prospects, they're all rated by their career WAR, so you do get a taste of that, and I do mention things.
I wanted to ask about the Tigers a little bit more. Do any player projections stand out to you in 2026, either good or bad? It sounds like a lot of guys are right in between. No one really extremely great and no one extremely bad, so there aren't a lot of holes. But then to build on that, if 40 WAR is where you want to be, where are the Tigers at this point in time?
They're probably around 40 WAR when all is said and done. Again, it requires a lot of assumptions about playing time, who's going to be healthy. I was happy to see that Dylan Dingler got a pretty strong projection because he's projected for 2.5 WAR in something like 450-ish plate appearances, which is pretty solid. And I take some personal victory of that because Zips was positive on Dingler last year, and I got some people who were annoyed with me about that. It seemed a little obscure player to get mad at me about, but that happens from time to time. And like most people, I like being right and looking right. Maybe I shouldn't have emotional attachment to being right on individual players, but I do sometimes. I think the general surprise is generally just how strong Zip sees some of those even fringier prospects on the team. It does see a lot of pretty good immediate impacts as using players as role players. Like Briseño, he's not going to start by any means of the majors, but Zips actually thinks that there is a lot to be interested in there pretty quickly. So I think this was a pretty positive set of projections. If you guys were doing Rocky stuff, I don't think we'd have that same discussion.
Probably not. Hey, before we get out of here, I want to ask about your experience as a first-time voter for the Baseball Hall of Fame. You voted for the maximum 10 players: Bobby Abreu, Carlos Beltran, Mark Burley, Cole Hamels, Felix Hernandez, Andrew Jones, Dustin Pedroia, Andy Pettit, Chase Utley, and David Wright. What was that experience like for you?
Oh, it was fun to get to do it because I've been voting on the Baseball Writers Association year-end awards for 10 years since the first year I was a member. But of course, you had to have 10 years with the association to vote for the Hall of Fame. It's funny, I probably could have been in much earlier, about 2009. But then I would have been murdered when I wouldn't vote for Jeter. publicly, and I'd never get to go to New York again. So I'm relieved to not to do that. For those that are listening, it's not because I don't think Jeter's a Hall of Famer. It's just that with a log-jammed ballot with 10 guys, a vote for a player who is an absolute cinch is a waste. Obviously you don't want everyone gaming it so that nobody votes for the player who's obvious. But when you have a player who's getting 99% of the vote and you think 12 or 13 guys should get in, there's a bigger risk that someone you don't vote for misses the 5% barrier than Jeter doesn't make the Hall of Fame. And I would have not voted for Jeter, and I would have been public about it, unlike the voter who actually did. And I'd never be able to set foot in New York City again, which would be disappointing because I do enjoy visiting there. So it was a fun experience to do that finally for the first time. I did have to make some tough decisions because there are 12 players on the ballot that I wanted to vote for. So from a utilitarian standpoint, I asked myself, which one of these votes is least likely to help someone get into the Hall of Fame? And really, I think A-Rod and Manny Ramirez should be in the Hall of Fame. But I also think that with this set of writers, that they're absolutely toast and there's no chance. And I think there was a chance that Dustin Pedroia or Cole Hamels might fail to make 5%. So I had to make an unfortunate decision with that. We have petitioned the Hall of Fame at various times to expand the ballot to 12 at least. The Hall of Fame has not gone along with that. We've also petitioned the Hall of Fame to make all ballots be transparent and published. The Hall of Fame does not allow us to do that, which is absolutely stupid, I think, because this isn't like a federal election. This is ostensibly an expert panel. If you can't stand behind your vote, you shouldn't be making a vote, period. It was a good experience, and it's always fun. It was fun to send your ballot to Ryan Thibodeau and have him put it in the pile, because everyone follows him on the Hall of Fame tracker stuff. And, some people were mad at me and they said none of these people deserve to be in the Hall. And I strongly disagreed with them, hopefully not too meanly, because once you're on social media, you're fighting with someone, it can be hard, especially with me who has a obsessive need to get the last word in, which is not always great.
Yeah, so for everybody who wants to know and is curious, the results for the 2026 induction for the Hall of Fame, that'll be announced on January 20th. Now, we know who you think deserves to be in, but based on what you've evaluated, what you know about the voters, who do you think will get in this time around? Because it certainly won't be 10 players. It's usually 1, 2, or 3 players who are going to get in. Who do you think gets in 2026?
It's an interesting dynamic in that there's no new slam dunk candidate this year. There's no one that's, is going to get 94% of the vote. I think Beltran and Andrew Jones will just squeak over the line. I don't think anyone else is going to come close. Utley's done pretty well in early voting. Last I checked, he was around 60%, but he'll drop a bit because the non-public votes tend to be more old school, fewer boxes checked, less sabermetric guys. So you'll see, I think, Omar Vizquel probably gain a little ground, and you'll see players like Utley lose some ground. So I think Beltran and Jones will get just over it. I don't think that'll be by a margin. I don't think it's guaranteed. I think they could easily fall short. And I don't think anyone else is really going to come close. I think the same goes for Bobby Abreu and King Felix. So I think are maybe 4th and 5th when you talk about the realistic candidates, but they'll both try to, if they hit 50%, that's a good year for both of them, and they won't.
All right, Dan, that's all we have for you. Thanks for joining to explain everything that we could ever want to know about the ZiP projection system and how the Tigers project in the 2026 season. Thanks again for doing this.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Everyone, that was Dan Szymborski, senior writer for FanGraphs. We have more to discuss this week, including what Scott Harris said about the offense. But first, let's take a break. Scott Harris had plenty to say about the offense, both at the winter meetings and at the press conference for the Kenley Jansen signing. We need to dig into it, but first, we're going to play the audio right here, right now. Here's Scott Harris on the offense at the winter meetings.
Scott, does it make sense at all to try to upgrade your lineup through external additions, or are you pretty committed to the young players you have in-house?
Yeah, yes. I mean, the answer is yes. Can we find those opportunities? I'm not sure. I think when I look at our team right now, we have a young, deep collection of position players who are in slightly different stages of their young careers. We have the kind of older group who's still very young and like still just entering their prime of like Tork, Riley, Carp. Those guys took a big step forward this year. We have the group behind them that's coming really fast and has gotten a lot of time under their belt, like the Parkers, the Dinglers, the Colts, the Wenzels. And we have another group coming behind them too. So I think the majority of our growth as an offense is going to come from within. It's going to come from that first group continuing to get better and step into their prime. It's going to come from that second group making the leaps that first group just made. It's going to come from this next wave of like some of the best prospects in all of baseball really starting to make that leap into the big leagues. We're going to try to find a way to improve our offense without blocking those guys because they're too important to both our present now and our future. I used to talk about them as solely our future. Now they're about to be our present and our future. So I think adding Gleyber Torres was a really important addition to our team. It's not that sexy because, it's not a new, unfamiliar player that we haven't seen. But if you just sort of conceal his identity and show me his skill set, like it's a perfect fit for what we need. Like we're a little bit too left-handed, so he adds a right-handed bat. We need more bat-to-ball skills. He's like one of the best bat-to-ball guys in baseball. We need more on-base skills. We need a presence at the top of our lineup. We need all of those things and a good influence on some of the young guys. And we're getting that in the form of Gleyber on a one-year deal with the familiarity that he has with our coaches who know how to kind of push him and get the best out of him. So I wouldn't rule out like an external addition to upgrade the offense, but I think we got a lot of momentum here, and I think a lot of the gains that we've seen in our offense over the past couple of years has been actually from trusting them and saving opportunity for them and watching them blossom into the players that they are now. I think there's going to be some regression. I mean, there's going to be some positive regression, like some gains coming from the existing group, both getting better and then also some of the injury guys coming back. Like, Veerling didn't have a spring training. Wenzel didn't have a spring training. Parker didn't have a spring training. And those guys were kind of like making up for lost time throughout the entire season. I think there's an opportunity for those guys to kind of reset this year and our offense to benefit from it.
Here's Scott Harris in the offense at the Kenley Jansen press conference.
If you guys do keep Tarik Skubal, do you feel that you probably have to go for, maybe the lack of a better term, all in, especially offensively, maybe the left side or an offensive piece to give yourself the best chance to win a World Series with your two-time Cy Young winner?
Yeah, listen, I understand the question. I understand why you got to ask it. I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals on if we trade or if we don't trade certain players. We have a good team right now. We're trying to win. We're trying to put the best team on the field that we can, and that's my job. And I think we made a meaningful step towards that with Kenley today.
Do you foresee yourself adding offensively? You said you were a top 8 offense, and then in September you became a bottom 8 offense. As of now, it seems like a lot of the same guys are back. Do you foresee yourself being active in free agency or in trades moving further into the offseason here offensively?
Yeah, I mean, we're always going to look to get better. Like I know I've said that a million times. Sure. I think there's an important point here is just because a lot of the names look the same doesn't mean the team is the same. From the day I got here, I articulated a vision that is built around development. If we're going to build around development, that this is what it looks like. And so if you chart the course of this team over the past 3 years, I think one of the things you'll notice is that individually guys change and as the team they change. So think about our team recently, like sort of a microcosm of that development is a guy like Dylan Dingler. At the end of 24, there wasn't a lot of people talking about him and him being like sort of foundational piece of this team moving forward. He got to work last offseason and he changed and he showed up and had a monster year for us. That is a sign of development, right? So individually, these guys can change and individually they are changing because while there is no baseball right now, there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes that are helping these guys get better. The other way that this roster does change is guys force our hand. Guys get to the big leagues. So there's a lot of young players that are in the big leagues right now that helped us get to the postseason in back-to-back years. There are more coming. And this team is going to change. This roster is going to change. So like on the pitching side, for instance, like last year around this time, nobody really was talking about Troy Melton. And now all of a sudden he's a huge part of what we're doing. Like there are a lot of young players that are coming right now. A lot of guys that aren't necessarily top of mind. but they're going to be top of mind in the summer. They are going to be a huge part of this, and we have to make space for that sort of natural change here. So listen, I understand by the nature of the question that the roster and the offense looks the same. Yeah, I agree. The names are very similar right now, but this team is not the same. This team is changing on an individual and a collective level.
To quote Scott Harris there, the names are very similar, but this team is not the same. When it comes to the offense, Chris Brown, walk me through it. Are the Tigers approaching this the right way?
I don't know if it's the right way. I do think for the makeup of the team and where they are as an offense, it probably is the proper thing to do. And what I mean by that, it's not wrong. And I don't think people realize this, that a lot of times when teams are growing and getting better, often the big gains come from people who are already on the team, the younger players who then take a big leap. You could look at Seattle last year, for example. Cal Raleigh had been a very good player, and then he just went absolutely bonkers last year. And Julio Rodriguez took a big leap forward with his production, and that got them almost to the World Series. Even though they're pitching, it took a step back. And that's the other part of this, though, is that you can't just expect everyone to get better. Now, with younger players, they're more likely to get better, but guys get hurt. Some guys regress. Some guys it doesn't work like that. It's a risky way to go about it. But like I said, I don't necessarily think it's the wrong thing with this roster, because they do have a lot of players who are somewhere between average and above average. And some of those guys might take a step forward, and then they have more prospects coming in. And so it's just a matter of, do you want to move on from some of these guys and replace them with older veterans who might be more likely to provide production now? Or do you want to stick with them and try to build this thing going forward? Now, the sword hanging above your head is Tarik Skubal is only here for one more year, but it really doesn't feel like they think about that much as that being their window closing, which a lot of fans do, I think.
Well, even going back to the trade deadline in 2025, Scott Harris said that he did not believe in a Tarik Skubal window to win. Like, he came right out and said it. And it was a really long answer. I typed the entire answer out, so I wasn't cherry picking quotes or anything, and threw it out there on social media, the full quote. And you're spot on. He does not consider a Tarik Skubal window when making decisions for the Detroit Tigers. So when it comes to internal development, if this is going to work, Riley Green needs to develop into a superstar. Colt Keith needs to develop into an all-star. And Kevin McGonigle needs to develop into an everyday player. And all of those things have to happen in 2026. Like, that is the requirement. If you're really talking about internal development and being able to take the next step internally with these young players, like Green into a superstar, Keith into an all-star, McGonigle into an everyday player. And then you do have to consider Zach McKinstry. Is he going to regress? Probably. Wencel Perez. Is it going to regress? Yeah, maybe. Javi Baez. Is he going to regress? Most likely. Spencer Torkelson. Is he going to hit 30-plus home runs again? Maybe. Maybe not. Dylan Dingler, is he going to be as good with the bat as he was in 2025, in 2026? There's a chance he's not as good with the bat. I think he's going to be an elite defender, no question about it. I think he is the go-to guy behind the plate. But is the bat going to be as impressive as it was in the first half of 2025? Are we going to see that again throughout all of 2026? Probably not. Riley Green, is he able to take that next big step like I mentioned? Colt Keith, can he take that next big step? Can Kerry Carpenter stay healthy? There are so many different question marks surrounding this team, and I understand if you go out and you get an Alex Bregman from the outside and he's your third baseman for the next 6 years, I understand. Where does Kevin McGonigle play? Where does Hao Yu play? Where does Max Anderson play? How do you get at bats for Zach McKinstry? How do you get at bats for Colt Keith? I understand the logjam and the thought process of not blocking young players, but if you are going to lean in to the internal development, there better be internal development, because the Tigers, do not forget this, the Tigers pointed their finger at the offense. Scott Harris specifically blamed the offense after the 2025 season. He did not point to the starting rotation falling apart. He did not point to the bullpen struggling to miss bats. He pointed to the offense. And so if there isn't internal development, my concern is that the Tigers are going to be left pointing their finger at the offense once again in 2026. Whereas if you go out and get an Alex Bregman, you say, hey, at least we did everything we possibly could to try to win with Tarik Skubal in 2026. Whereas if you don't make a move like that, you lean on internal development and then there's not enough there, you could be pointing at the offense saying it just wasn't good enough.
I think at a certain point, you're wasting value in your prospects. If you mentioned Max Anderson, Hao Yu, who knows how these guys are actually viewed, but they're all up in AAA now, and there's not going to be enough roster spots for them. We've just seen the Tigers kind of run through Justyn-Henry Malloy, not trade him if he had any value, and Jace Young is probably next. And it's nice to have the reinforcements at AAA, but at a certain point, trade those guys and get somebody who could help the big league club. And just to go back to the Gleyber Torres comments, again, they're correct. He is the sort of player the Tigers need, but he was the sort of player the Tigers actually had last year. They need another one. And I think that's what kind of bothers fans. It's like, yeah, get another Gleyber Torres and then we'll be good. But yeah, I don't know.
Well said. All right, it's time to get out of here. Thanks to Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for co-hosting with me this week. Thanks to everyone out there for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Drop us a rating. Comment what you think about the show. And stick with freep.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, and our magical producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.